And welcome in, everybody, to another edition of the College Hoop News Podcast. I'm your host, Tony Patelis. Tonight, we have our weekly recap. I believe this is our fourth one. We're just about a month into the season. Plenty to talk about tonight. We had the Big Ten ACC Challenge this past week. I want to dive into some Big 12 talk, some SEC talk, also some Big East. So a lot to talk about. I'm going to bring in my guest right now, Brad Cavallaro. Brad's all over the place right now. He's doing work for SoutheastHoops.com, Rush to the Court as well, also busting brackets. So glad to have him back on the podcast. I'm sure you're familiar with Brad. Brad, how are you tonight, my friend?
I'm very good, Tony. How are you? It's been a pretty eventful week in college basketball, so we certainly have a lot to get to.
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to obviously dive into the Big Ten ACC Challenge. We'll start with that tonight. Very competitive tournament. Both conferences came away with 7 wins. So I just want to dive into some of the better matchups and get your opinion on some of these teams. I think obviously we have to start with Michigan and UNC. Michigan won 84-67 in a very, very impressive performance. And I think the main concern I think a lot of people had, Brad, with this Michigan team was replacing Mo Wagner. But this Iggy Brazdeikis kid has come in and played fantastic. He had 24 points and 5 rebounds in that win over UNC. He's been really good. Michigan looks like a legit national title contender. John Beilein doing a fantastic job. Great defensive team. Talk a little bit about Michigan and what do you see from them early on?
Yeah, so I mean they've been super impressive so far, and I think one of the main reasons why they've been so much better than most people thought is John Teske. I mean he's really made a huge jump this year, and he's even spacing the floor, knocking down 3-pointers, and being one of the best defenders in the entire country. He's an excellent post defender, fairly mobile for his size. He's given them a lot in the middle, and then they've kind of condensed their rotation to only like 7 guys. All of them have experience except for you mentioned Iggy Brazdeikis. They have very, very solid freshmen. So they're only playing veterans. They have a nice tight rotation. They have versatile guys who can play different positions. Charles Matthews is a solid number 1 option, and Xavier Simpson's a really, really steady point guard. I mean that's a really good core you have right there.
Yeah, definitely. And Teske, as you mentioned, he had 17 points and 8 rebounds last night in Michigan's win over Purdue. He's been a really, really key role player for them. Michigan, it's just crazy because we know John Beilein's known for his offensive wizardry, if that's what you want to call it. But these last 2 years, this team has been fantastic defensively. They only give up 51 points a game here in the first month of the season. They hold teams to 30% from the perimeter. And they're really good offensively. I mean, I wouldn't say they're really, really good offensively, but they're definitely efficient. They're a good 3-point shooting team. On the other hand, North Carolina is kind of off to a somewhat rocky start. I still believe in this team. I think, it's very difficult to replace a Joel Berry and a Theo Pinson. They have young players in key spots. I just think once these young players get some more experience, they're going to be fine. What do you think about North Carolina?
Yeah, I was super high on North Carolina coming in. I think Kobe White is a really, really strong player. He actually might be too good to the fact where they may lose him after 1 year when they expect him to be a multi-year player. But, I mean, he can really shoot it. He can really score. I saw him for the first time during U18s this summer, like the summer U18 basketball tournament, and he was really impressive, especially shooting the ball. So I think as he continues to kind of find his point guard skills, and they have a lot of veterans. Guys like Luke May and Cam Johnson, who are very proven, excellent shooters, great offensive players. They should be fine. I know the one kind of controversial aspect of them is that they're bringing Naz Little off the bench, and I don't know how much longer that's going to last. I think that they will be at their best playing Little at the 4 and May at the 5, kind of like what they did last year with Pinson in May. But it seems like Roy's going back to his old two big man lineups that he's had a lot of success with.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I just think this North Carolina team is going to need a little bit of time to get clicking here and get their young players experience, as I said. The next matchup I wanted to talk about with you, Brad, was Florida State and Purdue. Florida State ekes that game out 73-72. Trent Forrest hits the game winner. He had just about a 10-footer with 5 seconds to go. Got Florida State the win. At first I was thinking, wow, maybe Purdue is better than I thought because I'm not very high on Purdue this year. But then I realized they needed Ryan Klein to hit 7 threes in that game to even, be competitive, if that's what you want to call it. Are you a fan of this Purdue club? I'm not per se. I think offensively they're just not consistent enough behind Carson Edwards. I just don't think they have the firepower this year. What do you think about the Boilermakers?
In the preseason, I had Purdue at like 35 or 36, so pretty much like in that 8-9 game. But I think that they're a little better than that. I think that they are probably a top 25 team right now. But I mean, it's also important to keep into perspective that, the top 25 needs 25 teams, right? So they might not be, super inspiring, but they still could be like the 20th best team in the country, which is where I think I have them right now in that 20 to 25 range. Carson Edwards is obviously a great player. I think Ryan Klein, now that this is his first year as in only year as that full-time starter with Dakota Mathias gone, and then Evan Boudreau has had some really strong moments as well. I think they just need some more from Matt Harms and Nogel Eastern, who are both sophomores who moved into the starting lineup, moving from role player to starter. So hopefully, as the year goes on, this is a team that had a ton of roster turnover. So maybe as the year progresses, they can start to figure it out and kind of become a little more cohesive.
Yeah, I'm very surprised how much production Ryan Klein has given them. I did not expect that he was that capable of a player, but he's been really, really good. And, I think Eastern and Harms, while I like both players, I like Eastern's. I think he's really good defensively, versatile kid. Harms is going to be a defensive presence in the Big Ten for a long time. I just don't think either of those guys are kind of ready to be, impact guys on the offensive end of the floor. I mean, Eastern is just really, really rough on that end. Do you think either of those guys can maybe give them a little bit more offensive production?
So last year, from what I saw of Harms, I really liked him. I thought, he was really mobile. He had a nice touch. He was fairly skilled to the point where I thought he would really emerge as a suitable replacement for Isaac Haas. Mm-hmm. Eastern, I like the idea of Eastern, like this big point guard who can allow Edwards to play off the ball. I just don't think he's quite there yet. It's interesting. A lot of these kind of point guard types who don't have a jump shot have really struggled. I think I don't necessarily understand why they were rated so highly, knowing that they didn't have the jump shot, and now seeing all these point guards without a jump shot, like your Ashton Hagans, Makai Ashton Langford, all these guys kind of struggle in the early going. I wonder if we see some like course correction from like the recruiting rankings and these kind of bigger, more athletic point guards in like a condensed college game with less spacing. Maybe they've moved down in the rankings a little bit.
Yeah, and I'll say this too. Purdue has just a really tough schedule this week. I mean, they had to play at Florida State, then they're at Michigan. I think they have a few more tough games coming up. So they could be 5-5 after this coming week. So hopefully they can pull out some wins and improve on that record. On the other side, this Florida State team, I'm really intrigued with. I love their depth. We all know that they're super athletic. They can do so many different things rotation wise. Now, and they're playing without Phil Kofer too, who arguably is maybe their best player. What's been impressive about Florida State out of the gate? What do you think about the Noles, Brad?
So Trent Forrest was a guy who really caught my eye during the NCAA tournament last year. He had a great run, a bigger point guard, great defender, very versatile. But I think it's MJ Walker is kind of the main reason that they've been able to kind of maintain their high level of play without Kofer. I mean, he's just playing with so much more confidence than he was last year. And he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. Came off the bench last year, was used primarily as a spot-up shooter, and now he's doing a lot of creating shots for himself, and he just has really taken the next step and given Florida State another scoring option with him and Terrence Mann. And then when Kofer comes back, this is gonna be a really formidable starting lineup.
Yeah, Walker's been really good. He's been shooting the ball well. I think he's shooting like 45% from three. Last year, he really struggled from out there. So, yeah, I love this team. I think they're going to be in that top 5 in the ACC all year. So, should be a fun team to watch. Next game I wanted to talk about real quick, Brad, is Wisconsin and NC State. Wisconsin beats NC State 79-75. Now, Wisconsin on the I'm not as high on Purdue as you are, but this Wisconsin team has definitely exceeded my expectations early on. They look pretty strong. Are you a believer in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so I had them in the preseason like 27, I think. like right outside that top 25. I was really banking on, you have Hap as a senior, another year from Davison in terms of progression, and then you get Trice and King back from injury. I thought that that was going to be huge. I did not expect them to be where they are right now, which is they're a borderline top 10 team. I mean, after that top 8 or so, that 9 and 10 spot, you can go in a million different directions, whether like Michigan State or UNC. But both of them have taken some pretty serious losses too. I think Wisconsin is as good of a pick to kind of fill out your top 10 as anyone in that range.
Yeah, I think the big difference maker for me with this team is Demetric Trice. I mean, he's been absolutely fantastic. He missed most of last year with an injury. He's shooting 58% from three. He's just been a huge difference maker. How impressed have you been with Trice?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's probably going to come back to earth a little bit with that 58%. But that Trice Davison backcourt, I think, is really solid. And then I think having a guy like Trice who is a point guard, but I'm not sure how much of like a primary creator he is. And to play him next to Ethan Happ, who you can play through in the post, I think that's a really nice fit there.
Yeah, definitely. On the other side, I think NC State has been, their schedule's been pretty rough. They've played a lot of cupcakes, but I think this is an extremely explosive offensive team. I think they could even be better than last year. I love the additions of guys like Devon Daniels and CJ Bryce. Both those guys can go off for 20 points on any given night. And then they played Wisconsin pretty tough in a pretty tough building, as we know. That's one of the tougher places to play in college basketball. Have you been impressed with the Wolfpack early on?
Yeah, so I had NC State 16th coming into the season, and I haven't seen them yet because you mentioned that they had the Super Cupcake schedule, right. And there was another big game that was at the same time as NC State and Wisconsin, so I wasn't able to catch most of that game. But I mean, I don't see any reason to kind of move them from where I had them in the preseason as like a top 16 team. You mentioned two guys, Devin Daniels and CJ Bryce. Those were the two main reasons for optimism for me, because it allowed Coach Keats to go back to the style he used at UNC Bloomington. Kind of with like a wing-heavy, very athletic look with a lot of guys who can hit shots. And CJ Bryce was actually on that team playing that small ball four role. And then Markell Johnson really had a breakthrough year last year that a lot of people didn't notice, because a lot of these teams that finish in like the 7 to 10 seed range, where they're not in the top 25 and they're not on the bubble, they kind of slip through the cracks. And that definitely happened with NC State last year. He's a really strong point guard. So they've certainly altered their style of play, and I think they have a really, really deep and you mentioned very, very explosive offensive team.
Yeah, the two concerns for me with NC State, Brad, is defense. Obviously, that they have a really good, some really good numbers early on, but again, the competition has been pretty bad. They were really poor defensively last year, and that front court they have this year is really, really thin. So that's a little bit concerning. But we'll see what happens. I mean, they need a lot more production, I think, from a guy like Wyatt Walker, who's a transfer. DJ Funderburk is okay, but I just don't know, because the ACC has a lot of really good big men, so that might be a concern for NC State.
Yeah, and I like the look in theory of playing Funderburk at the 5, like a very athletic guy. I mean, he was a top 5 JUCO prospect, former top 100 recruit who signed at Ohio State. I like the idea of him being like an athletic 5, but it seems like they're going with Wyatt Walker, who's more of like a low post kind of bruiser, interior scorer type, at least so far in the early season.
Yeah, definitely. So the next game, Virginia, Maryland. Virginia holds on and beats Maryland 76-71. Let's start with Maryland here, Brad. The Terps have played quite well out of the gate, especially I think Bruno Fernando has made really big strides early on. He's been a force inside. The freshman Jalen Smith has played well. Anthony Cowan. What's your takeaway from the Terps so far this season?
So I was very down on Maryland coming into the year. I had them as an NIT team. I know a lot of people had them in the top 25. I was worried about their spacing and playing these two big men together, and the loss of Kevin Herter. But I mean, so far it looks like that they've maintained pretty well. I mean, they demolished Marshall, who a lot of people thought was going to be a top 100 team. Although Marshall did lose by, I think, 20 plus to Ohio U the other day. But certainly no bad losses so far from Maryland. I know that They flirted with one to Delaware. But I mean, they've only lost to Virginia. They had a nice win over Penn State yesterday. Who's probably a better team than their ranking will indicate, given that they missed Mike Watkins for the first few games. So I think Maryland has proven that they can be right in the mix for a tournament bid.
Yeah, I think they're going to have an interesting game on Thursday. They're going to be at Purdue, so that's a pretty tough test. So I'm interested to watch that game. But I think Fernando, what's your takeaway on Bruno Fernando? He's been really, really good.
Yeah, so the first time I got like a real detailed look at him was at the NBA Combine scrimmages last June or May, whatever. He certainly did not look out of place among other potential second-round NBA prospects. I mean, he can space the floor. He's big. He's athletic. He's a powerful dunker, solid shot blocker. I mean, he has some real appealing characteristics. And he had a strong freshman year last year, kind of petered off toward the end. Or teetered off rather, but I think if he emerges, which it looks like he has so far, as a solid kind of secondary option to Anthony Cowan, I think Maryland will be in great shape.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they're definitely going to be in that tournament mix this year. On the other side, obviously Virginia has been fantastic so far this season. They're 7-0. They've had a nice little stretch here where they beat Dayton, Wisconsin, and Maryland. They won the Battle for Atlanta's tournament. As everybody knows. And I just think, Brad, the main thing for me this year is DeAndre Hunter. He just looks like he's going to be an all-ACC guy this year. He's averaging 16.6 points a game, 6 rebounds. He's shooting 44% from three. He's excellent defensively. I just think he's one of the better two-way players in the country. How do you feel about Virginia so far?
Yeah, so preseason, I had them second and had to bump them down to third, but I'm still obviously super high on them. I've been surprised at the lack of production from Braxton Key. I thought he was going to be like a real impact guy. Once he.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Once he got that waiver to play immediately, I thought they'll plug him into power forward and he'd be a great fit. But they've gone with Kihei Clark, like an undersized freshman point guard, as kind of like a steadying force there. But I'm a big DeAndre Hunter guy. I love Ty Jerome. They have some really nice pieces there, and they should be, probably a 1 or 2 seed again this year.
Yeah, Kihei Clark has been a very big surprise. He's been great taking care of the basketball. He's excellent with ball security. He can shoot the three. He kind of came out of nowhere. I didn't expect him to have such a big role, especially early on as well. And you mentioned Braxton Key. I'm right there with you. He's been extremely disappointing. He's not a good shooter. Shooting 35% from the field, 33% from three. He's pretty athletic. I guess he's versatile, but I just don't see anything that he does really well.
I think he was supposed to be like a point forward type, but his freshman year at Alabama, he kind of showed that, and then had a drop off last year when they had more talent on the team, and he missed the first portion of the year with injury. And it looks like now like another kind of vast change in like roster construction, going to a new team, hasn't really found his footing yet.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Just 2 more games I wanted to talk about with you real quick, Brad, is Syracuse and Ohio State. I think, Syracuse picks up a big road win. I really like Ohio State. I think they're an excellent team. Chris Holtman's a fantastic coach. But Syracuse gets a road win, 72-62. Just a really I thought it was the best performance they've had all year. O'Shea Brissett, Elijah Hughes played fantastic. Tyus Battle as well. What do you think about Syracuse early on, and what do you think about that win?
Yes, I mean, everyone was writing off Syracuse, even though they were playing without Frank Howard. He comes back, and they get this huge kind of season-saving road win almost. Yeah,
definitely. And on the other side, actually, one more question about Syracuse. Are you surprised? I really liked the Dolezaj, Marek Dolezaj, coming into the season. He's been really disappointing. Are you surprised? Were you high on him as well?
Absolutely. He was great in the NCAA tournament. He was really making plays from that power forward spot. And then they went with Elijah Hughes, who looks like he's played pretty well so far. I watched him in the 2K Classic, and he was very good. But it seems like Dolezaj is fighting an uphill battle to get minutes, which certainly surprised me. But an interesting thing about Syracuse is I think that the loss of Frank Howard single-handedly kept the perception of UConn, Oregon, and Iowa super high, where UConn gets this win over Syracuse, even though they were shorthanded, and people think UConn's legit. Then Oregon salvages their tournament stretch by beating Syracuse, so people think that they're still, still in the mix. And then Iowa beats Oregon, so I think the whole reason why Iowa broke into the rankings and Oregon stayed in the rankings, was because of the kind of like the chain reaction of beating Syracuse. And I think that we saw this past week. Certainly Oregon should not be anywhere close to the rankings. And even Iowa looks to be a touch overrated, probably more of a top 35 team than a top 14 team where they were ranked this week in the AP poll.
Oh yeah, I'm right there with you. Oregon's had a horrible week, two really bad losses. On the other side of that game, though, Ohio State is a team that, after what they did last year, they kind of came out of nowhere. They were picked to finish, in the bottom of the Big Ten, and they had such a great season. I think they tied for second in the Big Ten. Chris Holtmann shows, I think he's one of the better young coaches in the country. And again, this year they've been kind of overlooked, and they're off to another great start. They're 7-1 now. They crushed Minnesota tonight. I really like this team. I think C.J. Jackson has played fantastic. I love their freshmen, Luther Muhammad, guys like that. What are you thinking about the Buckeyes so far, Brad?
Yeah, I've been impressed. I had them as my first team out in the preseason, but I mean they certainly look like a top 25 team right now. You mentioned Muhammad and C.J. Jackson, and then Caleb Weston has played really well at that center spot. And they've gotten like a great veteran presence from Keyshawn Woods, the grad transfer from Wake Forest, who's a proven double-figure scorer in the ACC. And then Kyle Young, who's emerged as their starting power forward. He's someone who didn't play at all last year. He was a Butler commit, follows Chris Holtmann to Ohio State, where he barely plays at all as a freshman. And then he comes and breaks into the starting lineup as a sophomore. He does all the little things. He's not a great shooter, but he rebounds. He makes a lot of smart plays. So he's also been an impact addition for the Buckeyes there.
Yeah, definitely. I think they can finish as good as top 5 in the Big Ten. I think they're that good of a team, and they're that well coached. Final game I wanted to talk about, Brad, is Nebraska and Clemson. Nebraska comes away with a 68-66 win over the Tigers. So, the Cornhuskers did something they just couldn't do last year, and that's win a really tough road game. So I think that was big for the team, big for the program. Does this team have enough, though, Brad, outside of their top 3 or 4 guys, to be an NCAA tournament team, in your opinion, this year?
So I had thought that Nebraska's top 4. I mean, obviously that's an excellent top 4,
right?
But outside that was horrible. But it looks like it's not going to matter because they have this great road win over Clemson. I said when Creighton beat Clemson too. That I don't think that this Clemson win is going to age as well as people think. I think Clemson's closer to a bubble team. Not sure why after they returned most of their team from last year. They did lose Gabe DeVoe, but Clemson has not looked good so far. But picking up a road win over a potential NCAA tournament team is something that you mentioned Nebraska did not have last year, and kind of kept them out of the NCAA tournament. I mean, now they have this nice road win, and the Big Ten is strong enough where almost every game is going to have a positive impact on your resume if you win. Even the teams in like 11th or 12th place, like a Penn State and a Northwestern, beating them will have a positive impact. Even Rutgers went on the road and beat Miami, who's also kind of definitely overrated so far. But that's a conversation for another topic. But
no, go ahead, finish up.
No, I was going to say that I think Nebraska's top 4 has enough to get them to the NCAA tournament.
All right, and on the other side, no, I know Clemson's had a rough stretch here. They lost a game at Creighton, which it was a tough place to play. They did play fairly well in that game, and then they lose to Nebraska at home. Are you still thinking the Tigers an NCAA tournament team, or are you thinking more NIT maybe this year?
I'm still thinking maybe 9 or 10 seed. The Creighton game was Paradise. No, it was
that's right,
Islands Classic, which I think is a new tournament. It was only available on like Facebook streaming, so I wasn't able to catch any of those games. But Creighton looks like they're borderline top 25, so it's not too alarming of a loss. I just don't like, and Oregon does this too, where they play three bigs in the starting lineup, where Clemson goes with Sims, Skara, and Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really two power forwards and a center, because Skara and Sims split that power forward spot last year. I guess they don't feel comfortable with their guys like Clyde Trapp and John Newman playing that 3 spot, but it's always awkward. And then Oregon, when they go Paul White, Kenny Wooten, and Bull, that's a power forward and 2 centers. It's just an awkward fit. And in Oregon's case, they have enough perimeter players, capable ones, guys like Victor Bailey, Abu Kijab, and Will Richardson that could easily start. So it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'm not sure if that's the reason why those teams are underperforming, but it's certainly not a reason, like a positive aspect of their play thus far.
Right. Okay. All right. So we covered a lot of the Big Ten ACC Challenge. I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about the Big East. Brad, kind of off to a pretty rocky start. I just wanted to start with Villanova. Wildcats are sitting at 6-2. They win the Advocare Invitational last week, and they look like they're starting to get back on track here. And then yesterday, they almost lose to a winless LaSalle team. What's your overall thoughts on Villanova? One thing that's really kind of not concerning to me, but very surprising is Javon Quinterly has been pretty much, a complete non-factor. He's not even playing, not getting a lot of minutes. How shocked are you at that? And what do you think about this Villanova team? What's wrong with this club?
Yeah, so I think Villanova's main problem is its point guard play, and I think that obviously stems from the disappointing start from Javon Quinterly. I mean, being a 5-star recruit on a team that just lost its point guard to early entry NBA draft, I expected Quinterly to step in there and Colin Gillespie to be like a 6th man, but Gillespie hasn't even played that poorly. I think that they just still need like a upgrade at that position. I think maybe moving Gillespie to the 2 and Quinterly when he finally, if ever emerges as a capable point guard, could fix a lot of issues.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like they're having a hard time getting the good looks that they were last year, and I think that directly stems from point guard play. And I am super shocked about Quinterly's lack of production. In the preseason, I ranked him as a top, I think, 25 player in the conference. It's where I kind of projected him to, be maybe 9 points and 4 assists a game, but he can't even be on the court.
Yeah. Now, if they do figure out that point guard spot and start to get some solid production out of there, do you think this is still the favorite to win the conference, or is it somebody else?
I still think that they will be, with the caveat being that I think that the Big East is going to struggle from a perception standpoint because there's no top teams. Where I think Villanova could win the league and be, finish the year at 17th in the country. So maybe the Big East can get maybe 5 bids, but they're all going to be between 5 seed and 10 seed, which doesn't help the perception of the league.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And the next team I want to talk about, we just talked a little bit about, is Creighton. I think they've been one of the more surprise teams in college basketball. I think a lot of people kind of pegged them to finish near the bottom of the conference. They had the nice win against Clemson. They've also had some nice mid-major wins. They beat Georgia State, who's really good. They also beat a really good Montana team. And then yesterday, they played Gonzaga really, really tough. Tyshawn Alexander, I think, has been fantastic. He looks like one of the better guards in the country right now. Are you surprised about this? Did you peg them to finish pretty low in the conference preseason?
No. I had them 9th coming in because I watched a ton of them last year, and they were very, very reliant on Kyrie Thomas and Marcus Foster. When one of them was not going or one of them was out of the game, the offense just fell right apart. I mean, guys like Tyshawn Alexander, Mitch Ballack, Davion Mins, Ronnie Harrell, they were all very passive. But it looks like Alexander is certainly their biggest breakout guy right now. He was someone who split the point guard position with Mintz last year. Now moving him off ball, he's absolutely thriving and is one of the best scorers in the Big East. And then I think 2 other guys who have had really significant impacts. Marcus Zagorowski, who's played a lot of point guard for them. He shot the ball extremely well. He's playing with a ton of confidence. He's certainly their future at the point guard position. And then Damian Jefferson too at that power forward spot. Someone I thought was kind of going to be like a 7th or 8th man. Averaged like 5 points a game as a freshman at New Mexico, but he's played really, really well. He's an energy guy, great defender, rebounds the ball, makes a lot of right plays.
Yeah, I had that right here in my notes. I thought their newcomers have been why they've been so successful with Zagorowski, the freshman, and Jefferson's playing really, really well. So we'll see what happens. Maybe they can kind of creep up into that top now because the Big East looks kind of wide open here because there's been so many disappointing teams. So I want to move on here, Brad, really quick. Just talk about a few more teams in the conference. Up next, I want to talk about St. John's. Now, St. John's is off to a good start. They're 7-0, but I think a lot of people got to look at that schedule. It's been really, really soft. They did have the win against VCU in Brooklyn, which I guess is somewhat impressive. But I mean, they beat Loyola Maryland, Bowling Green, Rutgers, Cal, Maryland East Shore, Georgia Tech. So I don't know how much we can take away from this team yet. What do you think about the Johnnies so far?
Yeah, so it just depends how much value you put on survive in advance because they've been on the ropes against Cal. They went to double overtime against VCU. They struggled with one of their other bye games and then almost lost to Georgia Tech on Saturday. I mean, you got to give them some credit for surviving. It's going to hurt their net rating and stuff, but at this point, just win out your non-conference. So that'd be 12-0, and then you have that Duke game in February, which could be a really a determining factor on St. John's this season. They haven't looked very crisp. They have a lot of really good players. Shamori Pons is the best player in the Big East. He's amazing. Mustafa Heron is not really gelled. And then Clark is good. Figueroa is pretty good. Simon's a great kind of do-it-all guy. Even Mikey Dixon off the bench is really solid, but they just haven't really had that cohesion. And they have five more cupcakes before Big East play to figure it out. But we'll see where they end up. I had them as my 25th team for like the past 5 weeks, but I finally moved them to my also considering section at this point.
Yeah, and I think two concerns for me too is they're really, really thin. They only play like 6, sometimes 7 guys. I know Sita Kite, the transfer, he's injured right now, so that was a big blow because they're really not a big team. They don't have a lot of size in that front court, so that's been an issue. And I'm not a big Chris Mullen guy. I don't think a lot of people are. I don't think he's a very good X's and O's coach. What do you think about Mullen?
Yeah, my opinion on that is, he got all these talented players to come in. I think that's the most important part, and now it's just going to come down to cohesion. I think not even the X's and O's. That is as long as they can kind of find some right, because right now the sum of the parts is greater than the sum of the whole, right? So they have all these great players, but their team doesn't reflect that. I think just once they start to find cohesion, if ever, I think that's going to be the determining factor and kind of carry Mullen's reputation, no matter how bad or how inept he is at coaching.
All right. And the final team I wanted to talk about real quick, Brad, with you, I just wanted to get your thoughts on Marquette. They're 6-2. They've had a pretty solid start. They have some, they had that key win on Saturday against Kansas State. Pretty ugly game, but they got the win. Definitely going to help their resume. I thought they played Kansas fairly well. That was pretty competitive. And I think a key for Marquette is that they've been better defensively. I think that, the additions of guys like Chartouni have really helped in that category. I think Ed Morrow, the transfer from Nebraska, is starting to get his feet under him. He's starting to play a little bit better. How do you feel about Marquette? Or do you think they're a legit contender in this league?
Absolutely. Preseason, I had them 22nd and second in the Big East. But, with Villanova faltering, they certainly have a claim for that top spot. I have been a little disappointed with Morrow and Chartouni. I overrated them in the preseason, expected them to really come in and really flex their muscles immediately. They've taken a little while to get going, but Theo John has played better than I expected. Marcus Howard and Sam Hauser are both very good. Howard had an explosion against Kansas State for 45 points. And then Joey Hauser's been solid. They just need a little more from their complementary pieces. Guys like your Brendan Bailey, Jamal Cain, Morrow, and Chartouni. And I think that they're certainly an NCAA tournament team, probably borderline top 25 at this point, and could certainly challenge Villanova there.
Yeah, definitely. I'm right there with you. I like this team, and the defense has been a big issue since Steve Wojciechowski's got there. So hopefully they can continue to play, just solid defense. They don't have to be great because they're just so darn explosive offensively. But we'll see what happens. I want to kind of move over to the Big 12 here, Brad. Get your thoughts on some of these teams. First up, I want to talk about Texas Tech. They're 7-0. They're off to a really good start. I think you kind of have to, in the same framework as St. John's, the schedule hasn't been great. They do have that win over Nebraska, which was impressive. I think that was in Kansas City. But other than that, they beat an average, in my opinion, USC team. They beat a pretty average Memphis team. Is this team really, really good, or is it more of a schedule thing? What do you think about Texas Tech?
So with Texas Tech, kind of a similar thoughts on them to Wisconsin, where I'm not sure if they're like a top 15 team on paper, but you got to fill 15 teams in your top 15. So I think relative to the rest of the country, I think that they're certainly like a top 15 team right now. I thought Matt Mooney was like a game-changing addition for them. They haven't even really had Kayvon Moore. I know that they didn't have him for their Kansas City tournament. I'm not sure if he's back yet. I mean, we're not going to pay attention to them playing cupcakes, for the next month. But he's a really important piece, kind of a point forward-ish type freshman. But they've gotten great play from Jared Culver, who's kind of elevated himself into a top tier player in college basketball. But I think that they can certainly stick in the top 25, and they probably look like the second best team in the Big 12 right now behind Kansas.
Yeah, definitely. I think you have to put them there right now. But, it's just, they're playing all these SWAC teams, and they do have the Duke matchup looming coming up. I think they're playing in New York on December 20th, so that should be interesting. But I just like to see them against a little bit more tougher competition. But, again, they did beat a pretty good Nebraska team, so that's definitely a good win to put on their resume. West Virginia is a team that it has been somewhat disappointing. They were ranked pretty high coming into the season. They lost to Buffalo early. They also lost to Western Kentucky. But they did play. I think they're playing better of late. I think point guard play is kind of the key with this team. I think once they get that under wraps and they get some more consistent play from that spot, they're going to be fine. I think they're going to be in that top 4, maybe in that Big 12. Are you with me on that, or are you just a little more concerned?
I think that they're going to fall to probably 6th or 7th in the Big 12, but that's still going to be good enough to make the NCAA tournament just because of the overall strength of the conference. I agree that point guard play has been the main concern. I mean, Bolden has played well. He has missed some time with injuries.
Yeah.
Then that front court is just so good with Konate Ahmad and Lamont West. So I think that they'll kind of find their footing and kind of settle into that, maybe like a 10 seed sort of team. But I mean, they've been completely off the radar since losing to Western Kentucky maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think a big thing is Lamont West is playing consistent basketball. I think that was an issue with him the last few years, but he's been really, really good. And I think Asa Ahmad has been really, really good. I think last year he just never got on track when he came back from the suspension, and that really hurt his game. But this year he's been playing really, really well. So I'm interested to see if they can kind of turn things around here. And the other team I want to talk about with you, the team that I really love is Iowa State. The fact that they're playing so well without key guys like Cam Lard and Lindell Wigington, I just think is so impressive. I think Talon Horton-Tucker, freshman, has been fantastic. Their transfers have been really good, Shayok and Jacobson. How impressed have you been with the Cyclones?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been super impressed. I mean, in the preseason, I had them 26th, so just the first team out of my top 25. But then Wigington goes out, Lard goes out, 2 guys who I think are, I mean, you could make an argument that those are their 2 best players.
Right.
And then Jacobson really, really surprised me with his play. I thought he was going to be buried, but the injuries to Lard and Solomon Young and Zoran Talley opened up a nice role for him at that center spot, and he's really taken advantage. So it's going to be interesting to see how they balance the minutes when everybody's back. But at this point, I mean, Shayok's playing great. Jacobson's playing great. Nick Babb's a really solid point guard. You mentioned Taylor Horton-Tucker, who's a perfect fit at that power forward spot, and they have a really nice core. They should be in the top 25 sooner than later when they get healthy.
And then the other team I wanted to ask you about is Texas. Texas comes off a really nice win against North Carolina last week. Then they lose to Michigan State, which is nothing to that's going to happen. But then they have the home loss to Radford. So how are you feeling about the Longhorns early on?
Yeah, so I mean, watching them in their Las Vegas tournament, I was super high on them.
Me too.
They were, I think, preseason for me, I had them borderline top 25 as well. But I mean, Kerwin Roach had the game of his life against UNC. Comes back to earth against Radford, shoots like 3 for 13. That was one factor. And then I think Jackson Hayes has been really, really impressive this year. I think he could even be a sneaky one and done type. But they're still using Jericho Sims, I think, more than him. And I think Hayes is certainly a superior player. So maybe when they switch that up and Texas can kind of get more consistent shooting, which might be too much to ask for a Texas team, but maybe that's what it takes for them to kind of figure it out and not. I mean, Radford's a good team. I mean, Radford,
yeah, definitely.
I mean, they're going to win the Big South. They're going to have a crazy good record, right? They'll be like 28-4 probably in March, but it's a game that you still have to win at home.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so I want to move on to the SEC, get some thoughts on some teams out of the SEC conference, Brad. I think overall, I was super high in the SEC, and it's still early. There's a lot of time left. I think it's been somewhat disappointing out of the gate. I think, especially Florida. I think you were pretty high in Florida. I was as well coming out of the preseason. They've had a really rough go of it. They lost early to Florida State. I thought, they really should beat a team like Oklahoma. I don't think Oklahoma is very good. And then they lost to Butler as well. And then they have a really tough game with West Virginia coming up. How disappointing has Florida been, in your opinion?
I mean, super disappointing. I had them 19th in the preseason, banking on a big three of Keith Stone, Jalen Hudson, and then Kayvon Allen having a bounce-back year. And I think right now, I mean, I checked this last week. I'm not sure if this is still the case, but DeAndre Ballard was their leading scorer, and he was someone who I didn't even know if he was going to be in the rotation because they added guys like Noah Locke and Keontae Johnson. And I think that just goes to show that Hudson and Allen and Stone haven't really lived up to the expectation and kind of what they've shown in the past. And like Nembhard's been solid, but they just need more from their veterans. And until they get that, they're going to be in rough shape because you mentioned Oklahoma's not very good. A lot of people were kind of impressed with their Battle for Atlantis run. But I mean, that's a 8th or 9th place team in the Big 12, maybe an NIT team if everything breaks right with their conference record. And then Butler, I'm not sure how good Butler is either. They are a fringe NCAA tournament team, I think. Maybe even lower than that. They are very reliant on Jorgensen and Baldwin to create offense. And they have a lot of pieces that are just very one-dimensional. So those are two teams that you should be kind of concerned losing to.
Yeah, and then LSU has had a pretty rough stretch this past week. They've lost 2 of their last 3. I'm not as concerned with LSU. I think their talent is excellent. I think it's elite talent. Naz Reid, Emmett Williams, guys like that. I just think this is a young basketball team that's going to kind of take a little bit longer to kind of start clicking because they have a lot of young guys playing in key spots. Are you high on LSU? Are you concerned with them at all, or how are you feeling about the Tigers?
So I am a touch concerned just because I had them. Excuse me, I had them 14th in the preseason, and now I mean you can't really rank them right now, given that they lost a neutral court game to Oklahoma State. So that was certainly surprising. But I mean, you mentioned they have excellent front court talent, and then they have a amazing point guard in Tremont Waters. So I mean, this team will be fine. I'm sure that they're going to be an NCAA tournament team, but maybe instead of being like a 4 seed like I thought, they'll be close to that 8-9 game. But you mentioned that the SEC has been disappointing. I think overall, I don't know if there's any team that's been better than we thought in the preseason in the entire conference.
Okay, all right, I get you. And then Alabama. Alabama is a team that I keep thinking is going to kind of turn the corner and figure things out, but I don't know. I just think this is kind of a 10 seed maybe at best NCAA tournament team, maybe an NIT team. They lost to Central Florida on Thursday, which is a team I think they should probably beat, but I guess not. What do you think about Alabama?
Yeah, another team that's been super disappointing. Guys like Tevin Mack haven't really made the impact that I thought. A guy like Dazon Ingram's coming off the bench. That was also surprising. They have a freshman point guard. I think that if I'm an Alabama fan, I'm a little worried if the Crimson Tide are even going to make the tournament at this point. Another super disappointing team in the SEC.
Yeah, they kind of remind me of a team with a really good talent, but I don't think Avery Johnson's a great coach. Unfortunately, I think he's a really good recruiter, but putting it together on the court, I don't think he's done a great job in that sense. And I think I'm right there with you. I think Tevin Mack, while it's early and he can still figure things out, has been a major disappointment. I thought he was going to be their leading scorer. I really did. I thought he was going to be that type of player for them. Kira Lewis has been really good. He's kind of stepped in to that Colin Sexton role and played really well. But I just think guys like John Petty are just very inconsistent. Dazon Ingram, very inconsistent. They just have a lot of athletes. I don't know if they have any, basketball players, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and then they play with like two traditional big men in Dante Hall and then Galen Smith. Like that's their starting lineup. And when you have so many athletes and so many like high, I don't know, guys who are seen as very good, and then who could play that power forward spot like a Tevin Mack, and then you go with two big men. It's like no wonder your offense isn't what people thought in the preseason.
Yeah, it's just they're kind of rough around the edges team. So, and then before we move on, Brad, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Big debate kind of this week on Twitter. I was talking with a lot of people, SEC fans. Who's better, Auburn or Tennessee?
I'm going to go with Auburn. I have Auburn 7th and Tennessee 8th right now. So it's very, very thin margin, but I think Auburn has a higher talent level. I really like the addition of Austin Wiley after missing last year. I think he could be a real difference maker for them. And then just, I think that they have the front court to match Tennessee, and I think that their guards are better. I think I'd take Harper and Bryce Brown over Bone and Bowden.
Yeah, I think it's really close, but I think Auburn's a deeper club, more weapons. So I'm right there with you. Do you think one of them wins the league, or do you think Kentucky figures it out and they're the conference champs? So who do you think you'd go with right now if you had to pick?
That's a tough one. I think I'll go with Auburn. I had Kentucky number 1 in the preseason, based on their play over the summer in the Bahamas, but they just haven't really figured it out either. Struggling with their freshman point guards, and then Reed Travis. I mean, this is kind of a recurring trend, but personally, I overrated a lot of the grad transfers and sit-out transfers for this year. We didn't mention this guy when we talked about Villanova, but Joe Cremo is another guy who I thought was going to have a major impact, and he's really done very little at all.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. He's been very disappointing. And Reed Travis, I thought he was going to be a all SEC guy, and he doesn't look like it at all out of the gate, huh?
No, I mean, he struggled over the summer too, like alarmingly so. But I mean, this is a guy who averaged 19 and 10 at Stanford in the Pac-12. I mean, he should be at least, I don't know, 13 and 8 or something. But he's just not bringing it consistently.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Final segment tonight. I think we have to talk about the AAC and how disappointing this league's been. I mean, I just don't know what to make of this league. Outside of, 2 days ago, I would have said, Central Florida and Houston are the two best teams. And then Central Florida goes out today, loses to Mizzou after getting a nice win over Alabama. I think Houston is really the only team I feel super, very confident about that can go out and win games. I mean, they crushed Oregon last night, which was really impressive. I guess Cincinnati could be in that discussion, but I'm not a fan of the Bearcats this year. What's your overall thoughts in the league, and how do you think it plays out, Brett?
Yeah, so preseason, I had 3 teams in, being Central Florida, Houston, and Cincinnati. Central Florida, it feels like whenever I watch them that they look pretty good, but they just for some reason just can't generate enough offense despite having some pretty good offensive players. So like they are keeping teams in games. They have two pretty bad losses. I mean, the Florida Atlantic loss is bad by
right.
No one can argue, and that even though it was at Missouri, I mean, Missouri is not good. I mean, without Jonte Porter, that is not a good team, and that's another bad loss for them. Their margin for error is shrinking. And in Cincinnati, I mean, since they lost to Ohio State, we haven't heard a peep from them. You know, they've been super under the radar. I think I'll tentatively stick with 3 bids. You know, maybe UConn can kind of sneak in after they have that neutral court win over Syracuse. I think Temple is probably better than people expect, but I don't think that they're going to have the resume to get in. And then Memphis, I mean, they had Texas Tech on the ropes and blew that game. That was a huge missed opportunity. So I think 3. I think I'll stick with Central Florida, Houston, and Cincinnati. But the question is, does any of those teams get better than like a 9 seed at most?
Yeah, you know, I think you could legitimately make a case Memphis has the most talented roster in this conference, but, you know, they've been really disappointing. I mean, it's a new coach, new system. I mean, that might be kind of weighing on the team a little bit. I think Houston is the only team that I've looked at and said, this is a really good basketball team. I mean, I think they're a lot better than I anticipated. I thought they'd take a slight step back after losing a guy like Rob Gray, but Corey Davis has been outstanding. Armani Brooks, has really stepped up. I don't know if you caught last night's game against Oregon, but they looked fantastic. I think right now you'd have to say Houston is the clear-cut favorite. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I was able to watch most of that game. I mean,
me too.
Armani Brooks shot the lights out. I thought even a Brisson Gresham played really well on the inside. He was very active. And when they get Dejan Giroux back, which I'm not sure if he was back last night. The part I was watching, I don't think he played.
No, he did not play last night.
But I mean, he's a excellent player who, even in like a 6th-man role, I think he can add a lot to this team. You know, they have a bunch of guys who are bigger ball handlers with like Nate Hinton, and then you can kind of with Galen Robinson, you know, you can play multiple ball handlers. I think that gives that offense a lot of potential.
Yeah, you know, I think Fabian White Jr., who is a kid who played his first game last night. He's been out with an injury. He's going to be really, really good in my opinion. I think Robinson doesn't score, so he doesn't get a lot of attention, but he shoots the 3 really well. He's a fantastic point guard. He distributes. He averages 6 assists a game, takes care of the basketball. I think he's one of the more underrated point guards in the country. He really runs the show for them and does a really good job. I think Robinson's a fantastic player.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm pretty sure he's been the starter there since he was a freshman. And just playing that many high-level minutes on pretty good teams. I mean, they went to the NCAA tournament last year. I think the year before they're playing NIT team. So he's played on good teams. He has a ton of experience. That's totally invaluable in your point guard. We see with West Virginia now, they lost 2 4-year starting guards in Carter and Miles, and they've really taken a step back.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. Do you think there's a chance that they get maybe 1 bid? I mean, do you think that could happen?
Yeah, I mean, whenever we're talking about teams making the tournament as like a 10 or 11 seed, there's certainly a scenario where they only get 1 bid, whether it's they take some more losses in the non-conference or they kind of beat each other up too much. Because in terms of maximizing bids, you want a clear top where the teams in the middle can beat the top and get a quality win. And you want a clear bottom that doesn't upset any of the middle or the top and just gives out wins without giving out bad losses. So that's a kind of way that the Big East has gotten like 7 bids in like years past, where like Villanova and Xavier are giving out the quality wins to the Butlers, the Providences, the Creighton's, and then the DePaul, St. John's, and Georgetown are just laying over and giving everybody 6 wins.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be, when they get into conference play here, it's just going to be so limited for quality wins. I mean, if you don't beat Houston, Houston and, it might just be Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF where you can, pick up wins to help your resume. So I don't know. I have no idea how this league is going to play out. I mean, if Houston, it might be Houston at the top, okay, but I don't know who's going to finish 2nd, 3rd, or 4th. I have no idea right now because they're just all playing so poorly.
Yeah, in the preseason, I thought that the top 8 of this conference was going to be really interesting because
Me
they were going to
too.
be grouped so close together, and it was going to be like they were all going to be like bubble quality teams. But I mean, SMU has been a complete disappointment.
Yeah.
Wichita State's is not there yet, and then you have guys like Memphis and Temple, which haven't built the at-large resumes yet. So it's going to be interesting. I just wish that we got that kind of consensus top 8 with everyone kind of in the mix for the tournament, like maybe their preseason roster suggested.
No, I know SMU has definitely been disappointing, but I think they have the talent to kind of maybe creep up, close to the top. Do you agree with that or no?
I do, in terms of conference record, because you get your best player in Foster back, and now you're certainly more talented, but they've taken some serious by game losses to the point where they're good enough to beat the top teams, but it could be a bad loss when they beat them. And so their talent level doesn't reflect how poorly they've played, which is dangerous because they can beat you and they won't give you any benefit from beating them, if that makes any sense.
It's crazy because if you look at their top 4 or 5 guys, I mean, they're pretty good. I mean, McMurray's a really good player. Ethan Chargos, Jimmy Witt. I love Jimmy Witt. Isaiah Mike, the transfer from Duquesne, he's been really good. And now they get Foster back. That's a pretty darn good top 5 right there. I'm surprised they've been off to such a terrible start.
Yeah, it just shows that some guys are even more important, like a Jerry Foster, than his talent level. Just like his fit and the kind of his athleticism and what he brings to that lineup.
Definitely. All right, well, so that's going to wrap it up for tonight, guys. We covered a lot of stuff. I really appreciate Brad coming on. Brad, do you have anything you want to plug? Any articles or anything you want to talk about before we get out of here?
Nothing really. Just been writing Big East Over Rush the Court, Big East site, and then working on a top 10 surprising players thus far for busting brackets, which I hope to have out sometime next week.
Awesome. And then you're also writing for southeasthoops.com.
Yeah, Brad, I definitely owe Blake some articles. I've been dogging him a bit, but I'll get on that too, Blake. Don't worry.
Definitely. You can find Brad on Twitter at BradCav2, CAV2. Brad, really appreciate you coming on tonight. I'm sure we'll have you back on soon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a ton of fun.
No problem, Brad. Thank you. We'll be back again, guys, next week, next Sunday, another weekly recap. Should be another great week in college hoops. I will try to get on Periscope sometime this week if we have a slow night for games. It was a great time talking to you guys last week. Finally got back on Periscope for the first time. So Tony Patella's College Hoop News Podcast. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks.